Okay.
Who is Catherine Bostick?
So I'm a small town girl who grew up in North Branch, who thought actually when I came out of high school, I came from a low income family. My parents didn't have a lot of money. Didn't think I could even go to college until my school counselor at that time, Jack Nellenbach, actually asked me, well, you've got good grades. Why are you going to college? And didn't know there was something out there like financial aid that could help me. So I decided my last year to like kick it into gear and do all this hard work, and thought I actually wanted to be an accountant. Nothing to do with the law really. And that's what I wanted to do. I loved my high school accounting class, and left to go to college. I went to Northern Michigan, which is way up in Marquette. Probably almost the farthest college you could go away from your house without paying out-of-state tuition. So went to college, and that was a major change in my life to be away from my family. Because really it was so far away. You couldn't come home every other weekend. It was
Right.
really far, and it was in my last year. Maybe it was in the early part of my second year of college that realized that I took a theory of accounting class and thought, I can't do this for the rest of my life. And I happened to pick up on a introduction to law class, and we did a mock trial. It was like a mock trial thing we got ready for by the end of the year, and I was able to advocate, and that was part of the whole process. And I thought, wow, it was almost one of those things where just a light bulb goes on. Like, I felt passionate about it. I'd never felt anything like that before. We didn't actually have a high school debate in my high school, our high school debate team. And but it's funny. I don't know if I should brag about this. I probably shouldn't. But we did mock awards in high school, and the only award I got was class complainer. And it's not really a negative thing, but I would debate everybody. I would even debate teachers sometimes. And I'd argue with people, and so I got the title class complainer. But I never thought about it as an attorney and advocating. And so when I took this introduction to law class, it was just like I said, the light bulb went on, and I'm like, I love this. I love advocating. I like helping people that are that don't understand the law, that need assistance and representing them in various fashions. And so anyway, that's when I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And at that time, again, from a small town, from a family that didn't have a lot of money, I kind of thought, wow, is this even possible? Could somebody like me be an attorney, And so my family was really supportive, but I knew it was going to have to be on my own. And I got financial aid for, going through college. Pretty much all of it was paid for. I had a little bit of loans, not very much, but when I went to law school, it was all on me, and I had to obviously take out loans. There's no financial aid for law school. So I ended up, going to law school, and I actually thought I was going to go out of state. I kind of, by the time I finished law school, I kind of thought, I want to spread my wings. I don't want to stay in Michigan. I want to go elsewhere and practice elsewhere. And the year I took the bar exam after I graduated from law school. I graduated like in January of '94, and I took the bar in, I think it was February or March. I don't remember the actual month. And I passed the bar in May, and my sister was actually graduating from high school. We were like 8 years apart. And that day, literally, she had her open house. I got in my car, and I had all my stuff packed in this car, and I drove to Boston. And I had a friend from law school who actually her aunt lived in Dover, which is just outside of Boston. And I stayed there, and I ended up taking the Connecticut bar, not the Massachusetts bar, because it was easier in the sense that I had to do the writing portion of the exam, but the multi-state part of it transferred from Michigan, so it was just easier, whereas the Massachusetts bar, you had to do the whole thing all over again. So I studied for the bar out there, thinking I was going to stay there. I'd done all these resumes. I actually got a job with this gas company working in their legal department, and I was there for a summer, and I realized that, okay, I missed being in this small town, and it was a very different world out there. I don't want to say people are different out there, but it was just, the environment was much different than Lapeer, Michigan. And it was very expensive. I realized that to get a size of an apartment that was probably the size of this room, it was like $1,200 a month. And I'm like, what am I doing? I need to go back home. So at the end of that summer, I took the bar out there. I did pass the Connecticut bar, so I have that in my, I've never used it, but I still have it. And I came back to Michigan, and I initially I interviewed all over the state of Michigan. I got a job up in Alpena as a public defender. I worked for the Office of Public Advocacy, and did that for a year, and it gave me a lot of good experience, but I ended up leaving that job because I had a really, really bad CSE case and realized I did not want to do that full time. I couldn't do that. So I, again, didn't expect to come back to Lapeer County necessarily, but of all my interviews, I interviewed with a job with Barry Schultz, who's an attorney here in town, and got that job. And that was I got interviewed in November of 1996, and I got the job the next month, and I came back and started working for him, and realized that, and actually he just kind of, I remember him, he had a car accident, I think the first month or two when I first started there, and there was this big, huge custody trial. Now I remember this case because it was my very first custody case, representing a dad in a divorce case trying to get custody of his daughter. And it was when Judge Higgins was brand new on the bench. He was on the bench January of 1997, so he became judge when I started practicing in Lapeer. And it was my first custody case in front of him, in front of any judge. And actually it was against David Richardson. And I felt really good about it. I actually won my case, and I mean, he literally threw me into it. I was working night and day on this case. I was single at that time, and that's when I knew I loved family law. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with families. So
And it's interesting you say that, because that's been your career,
Mhm.
family law. And I think people who don't go into law don't always think about the fact that there's a wide array of possibilities when you go into law, right? There's patent law, there's immigration law, there's a lot of different things you could do. It's easy to think just you're a lawyer, you're an attorney, and that's what you are. What made you decide, or I should say, you've explained quite a bit what made you decide family law, but was there anything else you considered, any other kind of law that you were possibly interested in? Because for a minute it was accounting, and then you realized you didn't want to do that. On your law journey, did you entertain any other specializations?
I did think about criminal defense. I mean, I had constitutional law classes in both, actually, college. I was a political science major. So I had constitutional law classes in my undergrad, and I had con law in law school, and I really liked that. I liked civil rights. I actually would have liked to have done a little bit more of that, but it's a very unique, and unless you're in a big city, normally you can't really practice primarily just that and make a living.
Sure.
And so, but I thought maybe I would do some criminal defense work. I had interviewed for various prosecutors' offices, but thought maybe I wanted to do that. I had one of my experiences actually regarding why I thought someday I would be a judge is in my 2 summers of college, they had this program, and it was called, it was a summer youth program, and it was for basically like a Michigan Youth Corps where you could get a summer job, and it was for kids that I think were low income. The summer youth program was anyway, to get a job, to have some money. And so I had various jobs, and I think my first summer when I came out of high school was at the Drain Commissioner's office. My second summer was at Community Mental Health. So that's why I remembered Lauren when I became a CMH board member, or on the CMH board. I'm like, wow, talk about full circle here, But I worked there as a summer intern, and then my last 2 summers were at district court. And at that time, that was in 88 and 89. Those were the 2 summers I worked there. I got a chance to work with Judge Steines and Judge Connolly, who were the district court judges. I mean, Judge Steines has been gone for quite a long time, but he was the district court judge who now is where Judge Barnard is. And Judge Connolly, I mean, that position's gone. Obviously, he retired and they didn't fill that position again. But I had a chance to kind of watch them and see what they did, and I was in awe of what they were able to do, and that was just kind of something I wanted to do. And so at that time, I mean, that was obviously in district court, so primarily you saw, criminal cases, from a misdemeanor standpoint. You saw some felony exams, but, and there was some landlord-tenant, there was some other stuff, but primarily you saw criminal. So I did think at one point, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll, be in the prosecutor's office or at the criminal, a public defender's office. And I did start with that. And in my practice, I think, when you're a family law practitioner, you still do other areas of law. I certainly didn't do patent law or anything like that,
Right.
but you do other things. You do estate planning, you do some real estate work, you do probate. I mean, that's what you do as a small family, small practitioner, small business practitioner. But I think, I realized I didn't want to primarily do that. I realized that I wanted to do something different. And so when I started practicing with Barry Schultz those first couple of years, I knew that this was my fit. I could, I really liked working with families. And so, I don't know, it was probably a convoluted way of answering your question, but...
But you said, and you did say, and I definitely don't want to dwell on it, but there was early in your career you were involved with the CSE, and
Yes.
it kind of turned you off from that. For those who don't know, and I imagine most people know, what a CSE is.
It's criminal sexual conduct.
Yeah.
In that particular case, without getting into really any detail, it was a biological father who had been molesting his daughter for many, many years, and she was actually an adult at the point that I was defending him, and he was being prosecuted. But there were like 30 counts, and it dealt with having to watch many, many videos, and it was a small jail. It was Montmorency County he was in, and at that time, I don't know if they've improved their facilities. I literally had to sit in the same room and be right next to him, and he was not a nice person, and that's what you take. When you represent somebody, you got to represent that person, and warts and all. And it just took it was a huge deal. It was I just didn't want to do that anymore.
Sure.
So
I can understand. That's certainly not for everybody. Working in mental health is that I've done over the years. Sometimes the same things are called upon. There are people who are sick, and you're trying to help them. And sometimes in learning about them, there's a inner confliction that goes on inside.
Yes.
And it's tough. So I can only imagine that scenario where you're representing somebody, and that'd be tough. So family law is something you practiced in Lapeer now for many years. Talk a little bit, try to give me a sense of how varied that is, because we're gonna move toward discussing why that's important to have somebody with that experience on the bench. But give me an idea of like what that really entails, the scope of what that might mean for someone like you to have over the years.
So that means that, that's your traditional, divorce cases where they have children. That's your cases where, again, if they're not married but they have a child in common, you could have a paternity case where, somebody wants to make sure they actually are the biological father of that child. It includes, so custody cases. It includes working with families in child, abuse, neglect cases, where I've been doing that for probably as long as I've been doing anything else. You work with, the mom, and sometimes there's more than one mom, sometimes there's more than one dad. There's multiple children, and then you work with the children as a guardian ad litem. That's another perspective where you're trying to do what's best for that child. You're trying to advocate for that child also. And so that's another area that I think, you work with kids. I kind of brought up the juvenile drug court program that I did so many years ago when I first started out. I was already on my own at that point with my own practice, but when you work with these, you don't work with these kids in a vacuum. I mean, you're trying to work with the entire family unit. It's challenging at times because the entire family unit is usually dysfunctional, and that's where the dysfunction of that child is coming from. And so sometimes you don't get a lot of good communication. Sometimes there's not a lot of reliability. But I think that if you treat the entire family, if you're working with the entire family, that's what's benefiting the child. It's not just working with this child, and you can't do that. That's not what they're a part of. There's an entire community there, and it's not even just the family. There's all the people that are in that child's life, whether it be a therapist or a school counselor or a teacher or somebody from a church, that really is behind that child. And sometimes you don't have anybody. Maybe it's just a friend who's giving them a place to stay because they're 16 or 17 years old and their parents have kicked them out. I think you have to look at that from that perspective. So I feel like I have that experience as well, being a part of that process. So even though that juvenile drug court didn't last, I've also been on the court appointed list where I've represented kids in juvenile court and probate court or in circuit court. I've represented kids in delinquency proceedings. So I don't know. Those are just some of the things. Personal protection orders when families, whether it's sometimes it's the man or a woman that needs a personal protection order, trying to protect themselves from somebody that they actually have been in a domestic situation with, and so those are situations where you represent those people.
What are some of the surprising lessons that you've learned over the years?
That's a great question. I think I've learned, when you're a new attorney, you think of things. You think of things more black and white. You think that there's a right decision and a wrong decision, and I think that's not. I mean, that's naive, but it's something you think like maybe when you come out of law school that there's a right way and a wrong way, and I think the more, especially in family law, the more you practice, there's never the right decision. It's the best decision you have to make based upon the circumstances, and I can tell you, nobody's ever happy. You think that, okay, your client, if you win, they're going to be totally happy with the decision. It's not like that. It's that somebody could, most people walk out of there, neither party is happy.
Yeah.
And that's probably the right decision because, again, the judge is supposed to be doing what's best for that child or those children, not necessarily what mom or dad want. And so I think that is one of the things that you learn along the way, that there's no black and white. It's a lot of gray. It's a lot of trying to focus on the best situation for the children, and that sometimes when you advocate for your client and your client doesn't necessarily get what they want, maybe that's okay.
Okay. That's
that's one thing I think I've learned along the way. And I guess I'll keep thinking about what else. I mean, I've learned a lot of things along the way. I gotta think about some of that.
Sure, but that's interesting to hear. Let's go back, if we can, to the juvenile drug court that you were involved with. I have two questions right off the top for that. One is I'd like to hear your thoughts in general on specialty courts in Lapeer. But before we get there, more specifically regarding the juvenile drug court, I'd like to hear from you what happened with that.
So I was approached I heard that they were going to try to put one of these together, and I thought at that time it was a great idea. I had already done a lot of work with juveniles in court representing them, and I saw that there was definitely an issue of substance abuse and alcohol use in our community, and certainly we're not insulated from all of that. And I was approached to be a part of the team. It was a team approach, and so there was a grant opportunity to begin a juvenile drug court. And I know some of the players that were involved, and I know Lori Curtis was one of those from probate court. She actually was the one that wrote the grant to get the funding for a juvenile drug court. Judge Higgins was the judge that was part of that team, who was on board to try to work, to get something going for juvenile drug court to help our youth in our community. And the prosecutor's office was one of those team members. And initially they were on board. I'm trying to remember some of the assistant prosecutors that actually, I don't think it was the elected prosecutor necessarily that was at some of those trainings. We had trainings out of state to look at other national models to see how they were doing their juvenile drug court. And so we went to St. Louis, Reno, Nevada, Orlando, Florida, to look at those examples. And I'm trying to remember, I think somebody from juvenile probation was a part of that team. It's hard to remember everybody, but there were probably 6 or 7 of us on the team, and we began the juvenile drug court. We obviously we applied, we got the funding for the first year.
Was it federal? Was it state? Just as an aside, do you remember where the grant came from?
I thought it came from it was a national level, because it was a national. I mean, we were having to go all over the country to look at these models, and so I felt like it was a federal grant, but I could be wrong. So it's been 20 years. It's been a long time since then. But we were approved for the grant, and we started the program. I know that there was an issue with the timing of the day. I think there was initially a want to be able to do it after hours, and I think, I don't want to say everybody, but most were okay with doing it after hours. But I don't think the prosecutor's office was necessarily willing to stay after 5. I mean, they obviously were a county department. I mean, they obviously had to deal with the issue of maybe overtime and all that kind of stuff. So they wanted to do it. I think we did it. I want to say we did it at 4:30, or maybe there were times we did it at 5. I don't remember, but it was definitely later in the afternoon, late afternoon time frame. And I remember we did it in the basement of the courthouse. We used the magistrate's courtroom, and we I remember we created a rewards and incentives, as well as sanctions, to kind of treat the entire individual. And we knew that the concept was it was a treatment court. We knew there were going to be slip-ups along the way for these individuals, for these juveniles, and so we were going to work with them. But so we tried to get some donations for tickets to a ball game, things to reward the kids if they were doing a good job. And there obviously were going to have to be sanctions if something happened. But I think the concept at the time was, okay, we knew that they slipped up. The court had to address that. They had to deal with that. But there necessarily wasn't always a sanction for every individual slip up. That wasn't the concept of treatment court. So I don't remember. I remember I had many clients, because I represented the juveniles that were coming through as their attorney. But at some point along the way, I don't know if this was a year, and then we had to reapply. We had to reapply for the grant to continue. And I know there was pushback from the prosecutor's office in regards to participation in the program, because from their perspective, I'm not trying to say here right or wrong, but from their perspective, they felt that there was not enough sanctions going on. They didn't think that when somebody failed a drug screen, they should be rewarded, or because they weren't rewarded for it, obviously, but that they should have been sanctioned for that. And there was a little bit of a disagreement on the philosophy of a treatment court. And because of that disagreement, and there was ultimately not a resolution to that disagreement, my recollection, and again, this is like almost 20 years ago, the prosecutor's office would not sign the grant application to get enough, to continue the grant, and so they did not want to participate any longer.
Do you think that was a mistake?
Personally, I think it was a mistake because I'm not saying we couldn't have resolved our issues. I wish we would have been able to sit down and actually talk and try to work out those issues, because I think that there could have been a common ground we could have reached. I think it was wrong to just walk away from the table and lose the opportunity to continue to have a juvenile drug court. I think there were some good things we did with those kids. In fact, I remember, this was probably 4 or 5 years later, I've actually had kids from that program come up to me and remember my participation and thank me for the fact that they were able to, get the help they needed, and it got them to the next point in their life. And I think it was, and said that some of the kids, not do well and didn't come out of the program. Yeah, sure. But I guess you remember the ones that actually were successful and that you helped, and that. So I think that it was unfortunate that we were not able to continue and keep that juvenile drug court program moving along. I think that was a disservice to the youth in our community, the families in our community. So that's my personal opinion.
We have drug court now. The last 3 or 4 years, I believe, in Lapeer County. Mm-hmm. It's not juvenile drug court.
Right.
It's adult. Also mental health court. I spoke to Mike Hodges, who's also running for 48th Circuit Judge. He talked about possibly being involved, if he gets elected, with drug court. Would you be interested in that? What are your thoughts on the specialty courts as they are today in Lapeer, and would you want to be participating with those?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Especially, with mental health court, with my involvement on community mental health on the board, I think that when we look at mental illness and we see the needs of these individuals, and sometimes, addressing the symptom, addressing, what happens, and what the illness, you're not addressing the illness. I think that the mental health court has actually done a lot for people that really the underlying issue is the mental illness, and not the fact that they ended up, using or stealing something. You need to address the underlying issue, and I think the mental health court has really helped those individuals, and I would absolutely love to be a part of that. That's what I think family court's all about. But absolutely, I've dealt with mental health court a little bit because representing criminal defendants, I've been able to refer them to mental health court. I haven't done that in a while because I actually haven't been on the court-appointed criminal appointed list in a couple of years, but not had a lot of dealings with drug court from the adult court, drug court standpoint. Only what I've done, I've talked to obviously other colleagues that, Colleen Starr, who actually works with the drug court, and I think it's the same process. It's a treatment court. It deals with the underlying addiction issue versus just what is going on with the actual crime that has, been alleged that what's happened. And I think that you need a judge on the bench that's going to actually address the entire family and all the issues. And so I think treatment courts like drug courts and mental health courts are dealing with those issues, and so I think that's important.
You've done a lot of things in the community. Former board treasurer of Lapeer Main Street, former board member of Lapeer Zoning Board of Appeals. There's a lot you've participated in. What specifically, I guess what I'm trying to say, specifically, you said you were on the board of directors for CMH, right?
I am.
Oh, Stair Law.
Currently,
Okay.
yes.
How long have you been on the board?
I was appointed by the county commission in 2013.
Okay, so that specifically, and then your other experience serving on various boards at large, how will those experiences help you if you become elected? CMH in particular.
So community mental health is, a wonderful agency that provides to persons that are served, obviously the necessary mental health services. I think that my experience being on that board and seeing what services that we offer people in our, in our community, I think a judge needs to know that. I think the judge needs to have the interaction with people in our community that have various needs. And so I think that my experience on community mental health gives me that, gives me that experience. It gives me the opportunity to know when I'm sitting in front of whether it's an abuse neglect case or whether I have an opportunity to work with individuals where there's a mental health hearing, anything like that. You're dealing with families, and so you need to know what services are offered in this community. And my experience on the board knows that we have a great agency that can actually help individuals and families in our community with those kind of services. If you've not served on those boards, if you've not served in those organizations, you don't have the experience with being able to know that that's a great resource, for those individuals. So I think having that connection and that that knowledge of the reputation of that agency is important, I guess. So as a CMH, that would be my experience. So I don't think I missed the other part. You wanted me to?
Well, if there's any other, you've served, like I said, you've served on various boards and
Right.
in different capacities. If there's any other experience out there that you think would be particularly useful if you become elected, besides your time at CMH.
Right. So I was on Licata board, which is the
Okay. Yeah.
Lapeer Area Citizens Against Domestic Assault. I not just as a judge, but in my practice, it's been helpful to actually have knowledge of how that organization works and helping victims that are they're victims of domestic assault, because I do family law. I have clients all the time that are victims of domestic assault. I have actually represented clients where they actually are they're the ones that actually perpetrated, they committed the crime. So I think it's helpful to know the support that is available at Licata. I know that it's not just about having a shelter, but there are prevention programs they have with Licata. There are counseling, they have individuals there that actually come to court and basically are someone that can be a support person for someone that's been a victim of domestic assault. So I think having, again, that connection, that relationship with an organization like that helps. It helps my clients. It's helped my clients that I've represented, and it would help being a family court judge on the bench with that type of connection, that experience.
One thing I've learned during the early stages of this campaign is the term cross-jurisdiction. So all the judges in Lapeer basically that means they can handle the gamut of cases, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
In your own words, what does that mean to be cross-jurisdiction? And how does that make you a better candidate for this position, given that's the case? How does that play to your strengths, is what I'm asking.
I think, I don't know if you obviously recall the Tea Party debate and what was going on there, and I was trying not to get engaged in, obviously, the back and forth between Judge Conshu and Mr. Hodges, but I would only point out that Judge Conshu, before getting on the bench, was a career prosecutor. That's where he has been most of his legal career. I understand that when he first started, he worked for somebody for a short time, I think down in think Livonia or something, I think he said. But primarily he's been a prosecutor. And Mike has been primarily a prosecutor. I know that he's been a front of the court. He's the head of the front of the court now, and he's handled, show cause hearings regarding support, and he enters, orders of affiliation when he has to deal with paternity cases. But primarily they're prosecutors, so that's their experience. They're from the criminal side of it. So when you have cross jurisdiction, if you're in district court, you don't just deal with criminal cases. There's landlord-tenant cases. They have not engaged in representing clients, whether it be the landlord or the tenant. I've done both of those. I've represented, so I have that perspective. I understand landlord-tenant law. When you are in probate court, you deal with, if you have to act as a probate judge, you've got to deal with estate cases. You have to deal with guardianship cases. You have to deal with mental health hearings. Those kind of situations, part of my practice is an estate planning attorney, and I do probate work, and I do trust administration, and I've represented clients in guardianship. So, and those are family related, but I have the experience representing guardians. I've experience representing the actual potential wards that are going to have the guardianship over them. I've represented, individuals that are at the psychiatric unit at the hospital where they need representation, and I've been, I've sat beside them. I've actually had a jury trial, one of probably the few jury trials in Lapeer County. This has been quite some time where I represented a person that was, had an order where they were at the hospital and they had a right to a trial, a jury trial, and so I represented them. So I think it's important that whether you're in district court, probate court, or circuit court, that you have experience in all of those areas. And so I have experience in criminal law. I've done lots of criminal defense work, even though I stopped being a public defender my first year of practicing. When I came back to Lapeer, I didn't just do family law. I also did criminal defense work, and I did court-appointed work, helping those individuals that were indigent. And so I feel like, from a standpoint of my experience, I have the most broad experience because I can address all those issues, whether you're in district probate or district court.
Mr. Hodges has spoken of the many jury trials he's been a part of, whereas you have not been involved in quite so many. Is that fair to say?
No, I don't think that's fair to say.
It's not.
So, in the sense of criminal jury trials, I'm sure he's done more than I have.
Okay.
I agree. I've done a murder trial. I don't know if he's done a murder trial.
Okay.
So I've done murder trials. A murder trial. I have done CSE trials. Again, criminal sexual conduct. I've done DUI, drunk driving trials. They're not extensive. I would never say I've done. I mean, obviously he's done more trials than I have, but I've done it from the standpoint of the defense side of it, so I have a different perspective, I think. But from the standpoint of family law trials, I've done hundreds of trials. Now, those are not jury trials. In family law cases, in divorce cases, in custody cases, you don't have a right to a jury trial. You have bench trials. You're making your argument. You're doing your closing. You're cross-examining. You're doing all that stuff in front of a judge. But those are trials just like any other trials. So I've done hundreds and hundreds of those. So I don't have a tally of how many he's done versus myself, but from a jury trial standpoint, absolutely, I'm sure he's done more jury trials than I have. But from a standpoint of trials, I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay. That is, I think, there's also the civil component, right, of when, as far as the different cases you might hear as a judge. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that's different from, say, criminal law or family law? What are I think you talked about landlord issues, maybe that's sort of also under that.
So in district court, you have not just landlord, you have landlord-tenant matters, and then you have any kind of matters where damages would not be over $25,000. So it would be like a contractual claim, something that's not specific to the circuit court. If it's an equitable type of claim, like partitioning property or something, that would be in the realm of circuit court, and matters that would be anything that were damages more than $25,000. So you have experience potentially where you could deal with a tort claim. You could have something that's a products liability issue. You could have contractual issues, real estate transactions. I mean, obviously, there's a huge encompassing array of civil cases you could have, but district court is pretty limited in regards to what you would handle based upon the limitation on the amount of damages that you would have there, and the fact that equitable claims are in circuit court.
What is your great, and we'll wrap this up here pretty quick, but I guess in like summation, normally when we apply for jobs, it's because we see like there's a clear opening, there's someone who's hiring, right? And it's not as if someone's retiring here. So it's a little bit different. So what is it that's making you decide that you want to run, that you're the person for that position that's currently held by somebody else?
Well, I think it's kind of what I've already kind of talked about. It's the fact that I have the family law experience. Obviously, Judge Konshu has sat on the bench for the last 6 years as and has obviously conducted family law cases. But I think I can do a better job. I think I can do that better job because I have, again, been in the trenches. I have been working with families in custody cases, in divorce cases, in child abuse neglect or abuse neglect cases regarding children, in personal protection orders. I feel like that I can do a better job. I actually have already been, I don't know if you remember this from the debate a couple of weeks ago, but I have been a mediator for over 7 years. And so I think I bring to the table the fact that I have assisted families in resolving their cases through mediation. And I've arbitrated cases. I've actually already been making decisions because the court gives authority to arbitrators through court orders to make a decision on, custody, parenting, time support, property issues. Various issues, actually, you can be an arbitrator on. And I've already been doing that. I've already been making decisions on those issues. So I think that sets me apart, and I think that I can do a better job.
If you had to boil it down to your single greatest asset that you bring to the bench, what would that be?
My single greatest asset. I think my single greatest asset is that I don't get caught up in opinion. I feel like I'm very, I don't know if pragmatic is the right word. So I don't want to say it's one single thing, because I want to say it's two things.
Okay.
I think that I am a very pragmatic person. I think that I can look at two sides, and I don't get caught up on all this other stuff going on. I can actually apply the law, and I can make a decision, and that's what you're supposed to do as a judge. But I think I'm also someone that is compassionate. And I think if you talk to anybody that knows me, maybe it's a flaw. Maybe I care too much, but I am a very compassionate person. So I think that when you're on the bench and you're a family court judge, you have to be a good listener. You have to take into consideration the families that are in front of you, and you have to be able to communicate with them clearly, and let them know your expectations. But you also have to be compassionate, and you have to understand their surroundings and where they come from. And if you can do those things, I think that makes you a really good judge. That makes you a good family court judge. And so that's what I think that I bring to the table.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Catherine Bostick, right?
Yep.
August 4th is the primary.
It
Good
is.
luck.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.